Hi, everyone at home. Welcome back to another episode. If you're not subscribed to these girls' Substack, the Mystic Sisters Substack, you absolutely should. Link in the subscription below. Do you want to say hi to people?
Hi, people.
Hi to people.
I mean, if you're
Who
talking
watches
directly
this?
to them,
My
right,
friends.
the
Hi,
camera.
friends. I should just shout out names because I know like every individual that watches this.
Well, eventually people will have to pay us to shout out their names. That's how it
That's
goes.
how you do it, yeah.
That's how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
No,
We're just
but for
small
now it's free. But don't get used to it. Yes. So today, what's the topic?
Oh, it's heavy.
Our usual
Our usual light topics.
culture, hookup culture, relationships.
And especially given the times we're living in right now, the Supreme Court is deliberating on possibly overturning the age-old decision Roe v. Wade, which found the right in the Constitution to have an abortion. They're looking at overturning that, so we might have less abortion in the future, and people are rioting in the streets over their rights to have an abortion, and other people are overjoyed. It's a very controversial time in American life. And so what do you guys think about that?
I used to have very different views on abortion, and I was very in favor of widespread abortion access and the women's right to choose and all this. I was very on that side of things. And then throughout my 20s, especially, I started to have life experiences that made me look at it a lot differently. And the main thing is that there's a lot of angles to it, but one of the major things is I started to see that the availability of abortion allowed people to have a much more casual view of sex and allowed people to be less discriminate about who they were having sex with and could hook up outside of committed relationships because they had this sort of like backup plan. Women were not as choosy about the men they would sleep with because they weren't having to vet them for whether or not they would be good fathers or someone they would actually want to have a baby with.
And men also don't have to be that because she can just get an abortion.
Yeah, men don't have to change, they don't have to grow up, they don't have to become someone who could be responsible for a woman and child.
So it's symbiotic, really. Like, women can be sleeping around, men can be non-committed to them because this option exists.
Yeah, and women can pick guys who are like, you know, maybe like a lot of fun or really hot or whatever, but like are not displaying any sort of qualities that would make them like stable partners, or, you know, maybe they're like very underemployed or they don't treat her well or they're off and on again, all these things, right? But just like having abortion as an option in the back of everybody's minds allows for this really terrible dating and hookup culture. And then often, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it's painted as not a big deal, which is completely incorrect, which you also learned through knowing women who've had abortions and the psychological trauma and spiritual trauma that they went through after having an abortion. I think that was also going on in our 20s.
Yeah, like this was totally surprising to me, right? Because the way that abortion was always talked about when I was younger was that it's just a woman's choice and it can free up her options to do other things and focus on her career.
And it's just a clump of cells.
It's just a clump of cells.
No big deal.
No big deal. And
it's just like a thing you do in the afternoon. You know, you go in, you have a cup of coffee, it's done, you move on.
Yeah. It's quick. It's like, it's not a big deal. It's just something you do. And then I started to encounter women who had had abortions. And what I saw was that it was the effect of that act upon them was anything but chill. It was like, I remember the first time I noticed this, I started to put this together, was I had a friend who was just like, blackout drunk and sobbing and talking about her abortion, and I was like, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's like deep trauma here, like this is like coming up, right? And she was really upset.
About how old were you then?
I was in college.
Okay, so this was your friend in college too?
Yeah. And
she was like about 20, 21.
Yeah. And it was just coming up when she was, you know, drinking. And then like
why do you think that is? Why do you think she chose to have this abortion? Like, why do you think it affected her like that?
I mean, I think that a lot of women don't understand that it's going to have an effect on them. I think there's like a lot of, spiritual and psychological trauma. I think women intuitively know that when they've conceived a child, like that's a child. Like if they were to just let things continue, like that would be their baby, right? And so to stop that process, they like know the gravity of that. And I think that the reason that all this sadness was coming out when she was drinking is because she had suppressed all that in her conscious waking life. It was probably telling herself it wasn't a big deal.
Because society tells her it's not a big deal. She had no support in the grieving. I don't think that there's really any space created. Like, we hear about mental health all the time. The left loves to talk about mental health, but they never talk about the trauma that women have after they have an abortion. And there's no space for that, like, grieving process, really. It's very hard for women to find. So I can understand why it came up when she was drunk. She probably just tried to go about her life, but then she's, like, carrying something very heavy. It was hard on her.
It's sort of like grief that's like not socially permissible.
No.
Like you're not supposed to, it's not supposed to be there.
Because that would reveal that it's not healthy for women.
Yeah.
And it's not allowed to be
said.
said.
Like our society loves to debate, well, when does life begin? And like all that is the focus. And well, what if she's in poverty? All those sort of like material aspects of it, like what if she's not ready to have a child?
It's better to have an abortion than for a kid to grow up poor. Is really the argument made often.
Stuff like that. Or what if she doesn't start her career? It's all these like material reasons. And then if you bring up the psychological impact on women, people like don't want to talk about that. And I think that people who underplay that aspect have not talked to enough women who've had abortions.
They'll dismiss it as an anecdote, but I did find a study that said that there's like an 81% increase in suicidal ideation in women that have had abortions. There is a study on this, and the numbers are high for depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, self-harm after an abortion. But it's not. If you like Google like effects after an abortion, you mostly get a lot of honestly like propaganda about how that's just a myth.
Yep.
But it's not.
Yeah, they try to bury it. And even like me talking about my friend who I knew in college, it's like, but that's like one story. And then as I was going through my 20s, I was accumulating more stories from women who were very upset about
it's really common.
Yeah.
Abortion has been made very common.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting when I think about your friend in college that had an abortion. I would bet that most women that get pregnant in college have abortions. Like it's sort of not socially acceptable to not have an abortion. Like it's sort of not so like the idea that like they're the ones making the choice is not always true. Like a lot of times they feel pressured into it either socially or do you think that's right? That it's sort of like people just assume that you'll get an abortion or that people feel pressured into it?
No, I don't think that's right at all. It's like the women when she becomes pregnant, she also doesn't have any support in going through with the pregnancy because everyone around her often is like encouraging her to get an abortion.
No, but you're right. Like they don't have any. Like there's nobody telling them that it's okay to have a kid if they want to. Like
or like I'll help you. Like no one says that.
Well, when I think of, I know one person in my social circle that got pregnant in college and had the baby. And she was at a Catholic college and she was very religious and it was like a major, and her parents were very supportive. And I think of like that is not the typical woman. Like we have this idea that it's a woman's right to choose, but like how much is that choice like leaned on by society to make it easier for her to be a worker and a consumer?
I remember, like, again, another anecdote, but, like, I was in an Uber once, and it was a Lyft line where you shared the ride with somebody else, and somehow the female passenger that was in there with me started talking to the driver about how she'd had an abortion, and, like, how it had just, how she was experiencing depression and anxiety, and the driver was like, yeah, my girlfriend got pregnant a couple years ago, and I pressured her to have an abortion and she's never forgiven me and like our relationship isn't the same and like heavy stuff for like an Uber ride.
Yeah.
But like I was like, that's when I started to piece together that like, oh, like he pressured her, right? Like he was admitting it. And actually the girl had the same story. She was like, my boyfriend didn't want me to have it. So yeah, like it's when we say it's a woman's right to choose, that's like not the full story.
Because women aren't atomized individuals. There are people around her in her story. Like there's a father, there's her parents, there's her friends, there's family, like there's
her job or her school.
Job. There's a lot of context to a woman. Like she's not just alone in the decision. So
yeah, and it takes support to raise a baby, to have an infant, right? Like I understand why women are scared, and in the face of no one supporting them and no one saying that's great. Maybe
even the father.
Yeah. They're not
especially
saying,
the
maybe it's complicated, but we'll help.
Well, even the sperm donor, maybe we shouldn't call them fathers because
they're not fathering.
Not really worthy of the name.
The title, yeah.
That's why you get terms like baby daddy.
Yeah.
Because it's like not. But yeah, it's just like the more I started to listen to women, the more I was like, oh, like their families pressured them, their boyfriends pressured them.
It actually maybe wasn't really what she wanted, but she feels almost like gaslit into it because everyone is kind of feeding her information like, well, there's too many people in the world anyway, so this is a good thing. Then they reframe it as virtuous. They reframe having an abortion as something that's actually good for the planet, which is insane.
And before we get into that, because that's a whole other thing, which I recently wrote about, women are high in trait agreeableness, right? Mm-hmm. So like it's hard for women to like, and we're very social, right? We want to like go with the
kind of people pleasey.
Yeah, that's not
to be a bad
quite
thing.
The right word, but we're like agreeable, and we want to like
we're pro-social cohesion.
That's the word. Yeah. Yes, yeah, well said. So so women are high in trait agreeableness, and then you have other people being like, get an abortion, like don't do this. So it's going to be hard for an individual woman in the face of that social pressure to be like, no, like I'm keeping the baby. And then what's she going to do? She's going to be who's going to be? I don't know. Like
her
people
whole community's
need to be at the
mad
hospital with her, and somebody's anyway. It's just
and it's. I think this is my impression is that this is the normative, average way of being for most people in America. Like in most communities, in most places. Like certainly if you're in a more secular area of the country, they'd be like, yeah, why do you want to like, have to pay all that money and go through all that effort to raise a kid? Like there's this implicit hierarchy where like convenience and material success is above bringing new life into the world. Like it used to be back in the day that people were very excited about having a new life, and even today people that have kids and want them, we congratulate them, right? There's something good about it. But now it's like, well, maybe they're good, but they're not as good as like getting a bigger house or saving more or like these other material things. But even in like rural areas, even in religious areas, even like among Christians, we see people having abortions rather than going through like the social shame or the material difficulty that comes along with maybe getting pregnant outside when they weren't supposed to. Like that's a story that I've heard a lot, and it's like abortions become, it seems like kind of the default for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And yeah, it's like I understand
like the shotgun wedding's gone. We've replaced it with a trip to the
to
the abortion
clinic,
right?
Like instead of just like being humble and being like, yeah, this didn't happen the way that would be ideal within a marital relationship and all these things, like instead of just accepting that and moving forward with the consequence of that and having the child, people try to hide it, right? Yeah. And it's like, and it's weird too, because like people know that people are having casual sex now, so it's like obviously babies are a product of sex, so we all like simultaneously know that like people are having casual sex and we are kind of okay with that, but then when a baby results we're like, oh no, like get rid of the evidence or something. Like I don't know, it's like, yeah, well, if you're gonna like condone people having casual sex and not speak against that, then how can you like why
be upset at the result?
Yeah,
like that's the result.
It's weird. It's almost this weird mixture of like modern and old thinking. Like
there is a problem that I see in some churches is like they're not willing to confront the fact that people sin and like be gracious about it. So like if you are pregnant and you're not supposed to be, like that's a big no-no, where like the correct I think a good church will, not judge the woman, not and like support her and be there for her. I had an acquaintance that got married while very obviously pregnant, in a Catholic church, and well, clearly, that's not the right order to do things, but it seemed like her church was very supportive of her, and like that's the right thing to do. You don't want to shame women into having abortions, like as a church that stands against that.
Right.
But that's like sort of like people just aren't comfortable with they don't have the nuance to confront the fact that we're sinful and that we give in sometimes to what we didn't mean to do.
Yeah.
And like Amy was saying about how they give a lot of reasons to justify it. And one of them is obviously the clump of cells argument. But the other really common one that people say is that the earth is overpopulated. There's too many people anyway. So they try to make the woman feel better and actually try to make her feel like she's doing a good thing for society if she aborts. Like that's another crazy on its head thing.
And because it's a lie that the world is overpopulated.
Yeah.
It's a lie. The earth can support way more people.
Okay, so let's talk about overpopulation.
It's a meme. It's just like something everybody believes. Like everybody from like the elite white collar worker in an urban center to like a rural like blue collar worker believes that the world is overpopulated. Like people, and what I'm saying is like people from all walks of life I've heard say this same thing. Well, there's too many people on the planet, and like setting aside an argument about sheer numbers, which by that measure it's like also not true that there's too many people because the earth can support a lot of people. But if you look at birth rates, most nations are below, or I don't know if most are below replacement level. We're below replacement level. America.
And so is Europe.
And Italy and Spain and Japan and China now, I think. Anyway.
China's getting low.
Yeah. So if you look at fertility rates worldwide, we're actually experiencing population collapse where there are more people dying every day than are being born. And what that's going to do, it's going to invert population pyramid so that you have more old people than young people eventually. And typically you want to have more young people than old people in a healthy society. It's like this, not like this.
Well, this is especially striking out here in the Rust Belt, right? Which maybe is kind of a little bit ahead of the curve in that it's suffering the same kinds of demographics as everywhere else, but it also has outmigration where young people that are born here leave. So you feel it's kind of like peering into the future of like what America will look like. And it's a lot of like old buildings that are falling down with no one to care for them. It's a lot of empty towns. It's kind of like sad and empty, like you're sort of in the ruins of something.
Yeah, when you go out and socialize around here, it's mostly people over 55, and the topics that are talked about are different. Like it's a lot of like health problems. It's a lot of my mother died. It's like older. It's like geriatric problems. It's interesting to be young people in an aging population.
Yeah,
that's what their concerns are and like what they talk about. So it's a little isolating and strange. And like you said, the buildings are falling apart. There's a lot of problems with not having young people in a community.
Yeah, because you also don't have that creative, productive energy that young people bring. This is like
new money.
Yeah, like young people are creative and they have all this energy and they want to create things and make things and like, if you go to cities, like there's like all these like cool new retail shops and coffee shops and restaurants and people, they're like experimenting and
building new technology,
building new things, and like that's the energy that young people bring to society, and they literally drive the economy because they produce. And older people are tired and old and they're not producing, right? And they even consume less too because they can't move around the world as quickly, right? They're like slower. And young people travel and they go to different cities and consume things there and like whatever. So like you need for material and spiritual reasons, like you need young people. You can't just have a society of old people. They're what drives things forward. And so I think people have a really hard time envision, because one time I was talking to somebody and they were like, well, we're not having kids because there's too many people on the planet. And I was like, that's not true. Actually, birth rates are declining.
It is true that we're not having kids because people think that, but it's not true that
Yeah, but I said to them, like, actually birth rates are declining, and they believe me. Some people don't even, a lot of people don't even know that, but they were like, oh, okay. And then they were like, but why is that bad? And it's hard for people to think like, okay, like, what if my community didn't have like enough firefighters or like people to pave the roads or keep up the buildings or create nice restaurants for me to dine at
or just people to care for the aging parents, like just people to caretake older people.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah, and like all these things, yeah, that's a big thing that I know like Japan is dealing with right now.
Yeah.
And just like they can't picture it, right? And like you said,
it's also,
you can kind of feel it in the Rust Belt.
It's kind of dark of a question too, like what for people to ask. It kind of points to our level of like moral rot and spiritual rot. Like, why is that for someone to ask you like, why is that a bad thing if there aren't more people? It's like, ooh, it means, like, what is your view of humanity? Like, do you think humans are good? And a lot of people don't think humans are good. They think the earth and animals are good, and humans are evil, and humans exploit and hurt the earth and animals. And that's, a lot of people have that worldview, and they don't like people. So
there's some stuff there. There's something dark about like a human that, you know, doesn't want to reproduce or doesn't think we should make more humans. It's kind of like a chicken eating chicken nuggets or something. It's like, you know, it's like just really despising who you are and not counting like your own kind of being as worthwhile.
Yeah.
Like there's something suicidal or dark or like lacking vitality in that mentality.
Right. Yeah.
And then like, and then
like, why wouldn't I want to make more of my kind of being on the world, right?
Right. It's like, do you like yourself?
Yeah.
I hope you have to kind of like yourself and your life and want to carry it on and want to make more of you, right?
Yeah.
But I think people don't. They're really depressed.
Yeah, there's something really sad, and it comes across sometimes. It has a political kind of twist too when you see people that like really are Americans and really hate America.
Yeah.
Like I think like that's kind of a manifestation of that self-hatred or like lack of passion, like that lack of willingness to believe that this is good and that it should continue.
Right.
Like there's a certain like suicidal gene in like our culture.
Yeah, more nationalist countries are like, and we're gonna make more of us. Like it's more of a national pride thing to have children, and we don't have that because we're really being taught to not like ourselves in our country. That's a good thing.
Like almost systemically taught that.
Yeah, like
we're
in the
evil,
institutions.
We're bad, and we did all these terrible things.
And this land was stolen, and it's a bad place you're in, and like people believe it.
Yeah, so then they're like, why should we continue? And then they can't like see anything good, and they're being told it's bad, and then they're like, okay, well we just won't. But like even like back to when you made the point about like vitality, it's like sad that like, you know, people who, you know, they are vital and maybe they're making mistakes because they're having sex outside of marriage and stuff, but like they like, you know, have that drive and that like sexual energy, and then we're just like, no.
It's all misplaced. It's like it's all kind of misplaced sexual energy, really. It's like, okay, so you're sleeping with people that you wouldn't want to have a baby with. What's going on there? Why are you sleeping with people that you wouldn't have a baby with? I mean, because it feels good, I suppose. But it's like, there should be some cultural corrections for that. You know, we need to like steer people in the direction of like family instead of just like hedonistic pleasure. I think that's a big problem too.
Yeah.
Just feel good. And it's like, well then, that's not a good metric for choosing people.
Then I wonder about, you know, if you're a 35-year-old man and you get your girlfriend pregnant and you tell her to go get an abortion, like, what is that? Like, what are you even doing with your life? I mean, why? I mean, what else are you doing? Like, you need more time to watch Netflix and like sit around in shitty bars and like what are childless elder millennials like? What are they going to look like in 10 years? Like, they're just going to be hanging out at bars and like consuming pop culture. Like, that's why they have to.
I think that
avoid baby. Is that more important? Like, where's our values? Like, where's our sense of hierarchy?
I almost wonder if there's like we were all kind of raised on media, and maybe there's like this idea that like you're gonna do something more than that. That it's like too average to like have children. It's just what average people do, and I'm special, and I'm destined for something bigger, and maybe that's
also a false dichotomy, though, right?
Yeah.
Because if you look back at all the greatest people in history, like a lot of them had kids.
Yeah.
And like who's the big name people today? I mean, Elon Musk is kind of famous and for being someone that really drives forward the state of the art and is very, very accomplished. And he has 6 kids.
8
kids. Like he might not be, I don't know, the most involved father, but he does in fact have children and thinks they're good.
And Trump has, how many does he have? 5? Or
I don't know.
He has more than 3, right?
Yeah.
So the idea that like, I don't know, you're going to have a kid and therefore you're not going to accomplish. No, I think if you're like some vibe maxing, barfly that's in his late 30s and you pressure your girlfriend to have an abortion because you're going to make something of yourself. You're probably not. You're probably just going to keep vibe maxing and keep barflying until you get too ugly.
Like that was your chance, man. That was your chance to do something.
Yeah.
And you blew it. Like you could have been a dad. You could have been something instead of nothing. And that's not what you chose.
And there's also like, I don't know, it's just, there's something about like having responsibilities and being kind of forced to think of something outside of yourself, right? That I think shapes you into a better person. And so like, it's not, no one says it's like easy. Maybe it's not easy, but like it is like good for you.
It might actually aid your accomplishments. Like people think they're not going to accomplish certain things. It might actually like light a fire under your ass to accomplish more things. I hear that a lot from people. It's like now that they have children, they want to like be more and do more. So it's
there was a UFC fight this past weekend, and the champion had previously been a very mediocre fighter, and then in the last 3 or 4 years he'd become a very good one. And people were trying to say like, what happened to this guy? Like mediocre fighters that are fighting for 8 or 9 years don't suddenly become great. But people were kind of saying like, well, he had his first kid around that time, and they think like that's like the commentators' psychological analysis anyway was there's something about having the kid that pushed him to want to be a champion, to figure out how to find that extra oomph to become a really great fighter.
Yeah, and some people like, I had a friend tell me that he's making more money than he's ever made because now he has someone relying on him, right? And it's like, okay, well maybe he doesn't get to put all that money back into himself, right? But still, like it's like this weird, false dichotomy that like when you have a kid, like you can't do as much or make as much money, or like things certainly change and there's different priorities there, but like
but it's also the fact that like what are we really accomplishing as a society? Like what's so important that people want to do? Like they want to be like media stars, like that's it, like YouTubers and stuff,
influencers,
like, travel. They want to travel, I think. But this is the crazy thing, because it's like, oh, you love traveling. Well, like, okay, when much of America is like ghost towns and cities aren't producing enough for you to even consume, like what good is your traveling,
people aren't like, born to make cool towns.
And maybe you won't feel the repercussions of that, and maybe you don't care that the next generation will, but that seems pretty selfish, right? Like there's something good, it's worth like passing it on and conserving it and protecting it for those who come after you. And I think that mindset better suits you than just me consumption. So
oh no, I'm supposed to like come up with something.
That's
we reached the end of a point there.
Oh yeah, I guess we did reach the end of a point. I did want to say that did we talk about how it's a mental health crisis? The aftermath of abortion is a mental health crisis.
We mentioned it, but I don't know that we elaborated on it. We could elaborate on that.
So
I have a friend that worked in she did post-abortive counseling for the Catholic Church. She worked for the Catholic Church, and it was a big enough need that they needed someone to counsel these women because they were depressed, racked with guilt, having difficulty with their lives after they had an abortion. So that and my other encounter with that is when I was volunteering at a suicide hotline, and people can check out my old podcast to hear an episode I did about that. Like I heard people calling in that had abortions and then were feeling suicidal about it. And like that's a side of it that we don't talk about so much in the media.
Yeah, it's like there's a lot of attention for a lot of things that happen to people that cause them to be depressed or suicidal. Like you were sexually assaulted, you were there was domestic violence against you. You even like you went to war or you served and now you have PTSD and you're suicidal. Like all of that gets attention, but abortion does cause a mental health problem in people, and it's just you're not allowed to address that at all because it would reveal that it's not good. So it's like this like under the surface mental health problem that you only see if you're tapped into mental health care services, right? It's not getting any press or like any attention or any activism is pointed towards it.
Yeah, and like the only way that I was able to like piece it together was by like talking to people, right, about their experiences and people they knew and stuff like that. But these like stories are going very untold, and then women think that they go into having an abortion with no warning about how they might feel afterwards, based on how other people have reacted. Like women react to this procedure afterward. They even if that day or that moment they feel like it's okay. They react to it and they have like trauma from it, just like all those other things you listed that people go through, and it affects them. It's like, but we cannot. If you bring this up, people like really don't want to hear it, right? No. For all the talk of like women's empowerment and women's rights, it's like, we care so much about women. It's like, if you care about women, then you'll care about the you'll care about the psychological impact of aborting their babies. Like it's kind of anti-women to not talk about this angle, right? Because it hurts them.
Well, it's another way in which like a lot of times feminism is anti-woman.
Yeah.
It totally For sure. Is. Yeah. It is. Yeah. If you cared about women, you would, why don't you support them with their babies? Like, because those are women too. Like,
or we've said on this podcast before, like, if feminism cared about women, like, it would tell them how to choose dependable men. It would tell them it would acknowledge that women want to be with men, and then, okay, here's how to pick a good one, right? Or like how to become a woman that a dependable man would also want to choose, and like it's just like
it would hold space for your grieving if you had an abortion, which I don't see it doing that. Or it would feminism would create like support services for feminism. I don't know. I think it would be pro-life if it actually cared about women, and it would
women create life.
Because women create life. That's kind of our role.
Yeah.
That's our
kind of magical, kind of miraculous.
Yeah, kind of empowering, right? Kind of like the most empowering thing you could probably do as a woman, and it's very unique to women. So it's just interesting. It's the feminism. That's where it's pro-abortion is coming from.
Yeah, and all the messaging around feminism is about women's careers and career achievements, the things they can do in the workplace, all of that stuff. When and there's no message about.
Oh, the message is to be a man.
Yeah, to be a man. Like there's no, because like to like men, I don't think they like love working. Some men are very driven by their like entrepreneurial pursuits, their business pursuits, but like truly the man working is to invest in the children and the wife, right? Like that's what is all this economic activity for, if not to drive and generate and nurture a new life? Like what are we doing? Are we just like masturbating? Like what's the point of like generating wealth and generating an economy if it's not to like put it into the future and to keep things going? So it's just like everything, like just to become a careerist or someone who gains a lot of material things just for the sake of it, like also is kind of anti-life.
Yeah, so it feels so empty to me.
Yeah.
Like I was working and I got enough money that I didn't really feel pinched for cash anymore. Like I was very comfortable and had some savings, and I was coming out of a long-term relationship. I was single, and I was just kind of thinking like I can buy anything that I want. Like, what is it for? Like, why do I keep working? Like, what am I working for? Like, I couldn't. There felt like there was something missing. Like a why was missing.
You hear that a lot from men. I hear that a lot from men that are single and working. They're like, I don't know what I'm getting all this money for if I don't have a family. It's sad.
But like our culture isn't like
supporting people.
There used to be norms that would like shape you and society into certain configurations that would result in families.
Well, we were talking about this, how we would ask older women like how do we get married and stuff, and they go, it'll just happen. But that is not true anymore.
Not true.
It does not just happen. If anything, what happened, maybe what just happens is you have an abortion or end up like cohabitating with someone for a long time. But just getting married and having a family just happening for people, that's a cultural effort that is not present anymore in people's lives.
It's like social infrastructure was created to make it so that would just happen for people.
Yeah.
And now it's like it has to be like, I mean, you have to filter through so much just like muck in the culture to like find someone who's marriageable, even to become someone who's marriageable. Like, oh my gosh, everything's just pointing. Everything in the culture drives you down.
You need. It's like the culture used to just be supportive, like in that direction, and now it's like, what direction does it really push you in? I feel like I'm like fighting a river current sometimes. It's like, get abortions, just climb at your company, like all these things that actually like aren't very good for me. But like that would be the easy. If I was a person who just kind of went with the flow, I think that's where I'd end up.
It's kind of interesting to me how like I'll be like the dude and I'll bring in the abstract points in the conversation, but it's interesting to me how the left used to be anti-capitalist and used to find like, you know, used to be in critique of capitalism, but cultural leftism today is really married to capitalism.
Yes.
It wants you to be a good worker and be a good consumer and avoid the commitments that are outside the marketplace.
Yes.
It's just fascinating to me how it's been co-opted and become a tool of capital.
And it's interesting too, because from all the messages that I got growing up, I thought that the hardest thing for me to achieve, the hardest thing for me to do was going to be to have a career. That was going to be really hard to like have any sort of career success. Just all the messaging I got was like, that's going to be rough. And then I go through my 20s and it's like, it was not that hard to like, you know, get a good job and climb the corporate ladder and like whatever. And I talked to other women who say the same thing, that like that was the easy thing to achieve, and the hard thing to achieve is marriage and motherhood. Like that's the thing that now feels really out of reach and hard to do. And it's like, what went wrong here? Like the opposite of what they told us is true. Like they were like, it's going to be so hard for women.
I think it was taken for granted that like most women ended up wives and mothers or something, or not taken for granted. There was a reaction against it where it was like, well, we want to. I don't know, it's hard to know what went on there. I wasn't alive, but it's like, well, we want to go into companies and we want to make money and we want to be out in the world. But that reaction was too hard. Now, like, the daughters of those women are like, well, it was really easy for me to get into the workforce and I'm actually having more trouble getting married and having a family. They kind of created the world they wanted, but they don't have to deal with the consequences of it. And the world they grew up in that they were reacting against actually got them to a good place. So...
yeah. And now it's like
hard to explain it to someone who's older.
Yeah, and when we
the like your parents' generation like wouldn't understand like why it's hard or that it is hard to have a family.
And I don't know if they wonder, like I have 30. A lot of these baby boomers have like kids that are approaching 30 or over 30, and it's like, do you ever wonder why a lot of them aren't married? A lot of them aren't married, like they're cohabitating or single.
Yeah,
so it's like they don't even. And then the baby boomers, a lot of them got married young, like early 20s.
When I talk to baby boomers about this, they're just like, what?
Yeah, they're blown away.
They're blown away. And they like can't understand when I try to tell them that, you know, like our culture has made it easier for women to like achieve career and worldly success and harder for us to find marriageable men and form families and have children. They just like they don't understand. Like they
might hear it. One woman's mother asked me like, what went wrong, and we immediately said the sexual revolution and birth control was, and I would say Roe versus Wade as well. Yeah. All of those things. It's just like an unholy trinity that results in like less families.
Results in hookup culture. Yeah. It results in women choosing men for how exciting they'll be for the next 48 hours and not for the next 48 years.
Right.
And then men trying to become the men that can be exciting for 48 hours.
Yeah.
Or just dropping out completely and saying like, I can't be that kind of man. So I won't get affection and I'll go online and having options or to entertain themselves and keep themselves busy until they die that are like a little bit more engrossing than they used to have.
Totally.
Right. Yeah. You could bring in tech and talk about how distracting that is for people when it comes to having families. It's like you can just entertain yourself to death. Yeah. And we have like a death culture. Where it's not life-giving.
Well, it used to be that I think by necessity, you know, people got married since time immemorial. People had kids because that came from people of the opposite sex being around each other, and then you sort of had this default pattern of reality, like at the center of human life. And then the baby boomer generation and the Generation X, they kind of undid all that. Mm-hmm. They made it so it's no longer the default. And now we are left with this like nihilism at the root of all of our media, all of our culture, all of like this ironic detachment from life, because we kind of cut ourselves off from that pattern of life. And now we have to, I think our generation's job is to like choose it. Yeah. To like say like, oh, we want that. It used to be by default. We freed ourselves from it. But it turns out it was good, and so we're going to choose it. Yep. And I think that's what we're doing, or what people that think like us are trying to do.
Yeah, you have to become consciously choose it, and it's in some ways it's like harder to consciously choose it because you're fighting all these forces all the time. You're tempted by it. So yeah, I think it was better when it just happened. I can see why people questioned it. Yeah. Maybe they were bored or something. I don't know, but.
Yeah, we just live in a world with like where it feels like you have all these options, right? Like we're now like we're a pretty wealthy society, like
why don't you convert a van?
Yeah, like there's all this.
Someone said that to me once. Go traveling. I was like, I want what you have, boomer.
Yeah,
it's hard for me to get.
Well, guys, we've been going for quite some time, although it seems like no time at all. 45 minutes. Do we have any final topics we want to hit on before we wrap up?
No, but I wrote a blog post on the Mystic Sisters about, wondering if people would be so in favor of abortion if they knew about population collapse that people can check out.
We'll link that in the description below.
Yeah. And, thanks for listening.